The white satin dress felt heavier with each step down the aisle. Jane Brooks' vision blurred as the faces of 200 guests swam before her eyes like watercolors in rain. Her father's arm felt like the only thing keeping her upright as organ music echoed through St. Mary's Cathedral in downtown Phoenix. "Just nervous," her mother had whispered that morning when Jane mentioned feeling dizzy. "Every bride gets the jitters, sweetheart." But this wasn't nerves. Jane knew her body, and something was desperately wrong. As she reached the altar where her fiancé, Marcus, stood beaming, the world tilted sideways. The last thing she remembered was the gasps of the congregation before everything went black. When Paramedic Sarah Chen arrived at the scene, she found a young woman surrounded by well-meaning family members fanning her with wedding programs. "She's just overwhelmed," Jane's aunt was saying. "Poor thing hasn't eaten all day." But Sarah's trained eyes saw something different. The pallor wasn't from excitement, the breathing wasn't from anxiety, and the way Jane's body had fallen told a story that had nothing to do with wedding day nerves. This is the story of how one moment changed everything, and how sometimes the people who love us most can be the ones who almost let us slip away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months before that fateful wedding day, Jane Brooke was living what everyone else considered the perfect life. At 24, she had just finished her master's degree in environmental science from Arizona State University, landed her dream job at a renewable energy consulting firm in Scottsdale, and was planning her wedding to Marcus Chen, a software engineer she'd met during their undergraduate years. Jane lived in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe with her college roommate and best friend, Riley Martinez. The apartment walls were covered with Jane's nature photography, sweeping shots of the Sonoran Desert, intimate close-ups of desert wildflowers, and dramatic sunset silhouettes of saguaro cacti. Photography had been Jane's passion since high school, though she'd chosen the more practical path of environmental science for her career. "You're living in a Pinterest board," Riley would joke, gesturing at their perfectly organized living space with its succulents, macrame wall hangings, and Jane's carefully curated bookshelf filled with field guides and conservation journals. Jane's family, parents Robert and Linda Brooke, and her older sister Michelle, lived just 20 minutes away in suburban Chandler. The Brookes were a tight-knit family who gathered every Sunday for dinner at the family home, a tradition that had continued even after both daughters had moved out. Robert worked as a high school principal while Linda taught 3rd grade at the same school district. They were practical, down-to-earth people who believed in hard work, family values, and that most problems could be solved with common sense and determination. "Jane's always been our overachiever," Linda would tell anyone who'd listen. "Straight A's, scholarship to ASU, and now she's going to save the environment one solar panel at a time." The wedding planning had consumed the past 8 months of Jane's life. She'd chosen St. Mary's Cathedral because Marcus's grandmother had always dreamed of seeing him married there. The reception would be at the Desert Botanical Garden, a venue that perfectly combined Jane's love of nature with the elegance her mother insisted upon. Marcus Chen was everything Jane's parents could have hoped for in a son-in-law: stable, hardworking, and devoted to Jane. He'd proposed the previous Christmas with a ring his grandmother had helped him design, incorporating stones from jewelry that had been passed down through 3 generations of the Chen family. Marcus worked long hours at a tech startup, but he always made time for Jane's photography expeditions, often serving as his assistant and carrying equipment during their weekend adventures in the desert. "He grounds me," Jane would tell Riley during their late-night conversations. "Sometimes I get so caught up in saving the world that I forget to live in it. But over the past few months, Jane had been struggling with symptoms that seemed to escalate alongside her wedding stress. It started with occasional headaches that she attributed to long hours at work and wedding planning. Then came the dizzy spells, which her family dismissed as the natural result of trying to balance a demanding new job with planning a major life event. "You're doing too much, honey," her mother would say whenever Jane mentioned feeling tired. "Once the wedding is over, you'll feel like yourself again."
The fatigue grew worse. Jane, who had always been active and energetic, found herself struggling to keep up with her usual hiking routine. She'd have to stop and rest during trails that had never challenged her before. Her appetite decreased, and she'd lost 12 pounds without trying, something her dress fitter celebrated as wedding diet success. "I think something might be wrong," Jane confided to Riley one evening as they sat on their apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Riley, a nursing student who was always practical about health concerns, suggested Jane see a doctor. Better safe than sorry, especially with the wedding coming up. But when Jane mentioned her symptoms during family dinner that Sunday, the response was unanimous dismissal. "Wedding stress," declared her sister Michelle, who'd gone through her own elaborate wedding 3 years earlier. "I lost 15 pounds and couldn't sleep for weeks before my big day." "It's completely normal," her mother agreed. "Every bride I know goes through this. Your body is just responding to all the excitement and pressure." Even her father, usually more reserved in his opinions, chimed in. "You've been pushing yourself hard at work, planning this wedding, and trying to be perfect at everything. No wonder you're worn down." Marcus, ever the supportive fiancé, offered to take over more of the wedding planning responsibilities. "Let me handle the final details," he said, pulling Jane close during one of their evening walks around Tempe Town Lake. "You focus on work and taking care of yourself." Jane's new job at Solar Vision Consulting was everything she'd hoped for professionally. She worked with municipalities and businesses throughout Arizona, helping them transition to renewable energy solutions. Her supervisor, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, was a mentor who saw great potential in Jane's analytical skills and passion for environmental sustainability. "You have the rare combination of technical expertise and genuine care for the work," Dr. Rodriguez told Jane during her 3-month review. "I can see you leading major projects within a year or two." The work was fulfilling but demanding. Jane often spent long days conducting site assessments in the desert heat, analyzing energy consumption data, and preparing detailed reports for clients. She loved being outdoors, even in Arizona's intense summer temperatures, and felt like she was making a real difference in the fight against climate change. But the symptoms persisted and gradually worsened. The headaches became more frequent and severe. The dizziness occurred even when she was sitting still. Her hands sometimes trembled slightly when she was holding her camera or typing reports. She developed a persistent feeling of being slightly off balance, as if the ground beneath her feet wasn't quite solid. "Maybe you need glasses," suggested her sister Michelle, when Jane mentioned having trouble focusing during work. "I know you spend a lot of time looking at computer screens and technical drawings." Jane did schedule an eye exam, but her vision was perfect. The optometrist found nothing wrong and suggested she might be experiencing eye strain from stress and long work hours. The wedding preparations continued at full speed. Jane's dress, a flowing A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves that she'd fallen in love with at first sight, required multiple fittings as her weight loss continued. The caterer confirmed the menu, featuring locally sourced ingredients. The photographer, a friend of Jane's from her college photography club, had already scouted locations for the perfect shots. 2 weeks before the wedding, during what should have been a relaxing spa day with her bridesmaids, Jane experienced her most concerning episode yet. While getting her hair done for a trial run, she suddenly felt nauseous and dizzy. She had to excuse herself to the bathroom, where she sat on the floor for 10 minutes waiting for the sensation to pass. "Probably something you ate," said her maid of honor and best friend Riley, though Jane could see concern in her eyes. "Or maybe you're getting sick. There's been a bug going around campus." That evening, Jane sat in her apartment looking through her recent photographs on her laptop. She'd taken them during a weekend trip to Sedona with Marcus, capturing the red rocks in golden hour light. But as she scrolled through the images, she noticed something troubling. Many of the shots she thought she'd composed carefully were slightly off balance or out of focus in ways that weren't typical of her usually precise work. For a moment, Jane considered calling Dr. Rodriguez's physician friend, who'd given a talk about occupational health at her company, But then Marcus arrived with Thai takeout and wedding favors that needed assembling, and the moment passed. The night before the wedding, as Jane lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, she'd stayed at her parents' house according to tradition, she felt a deep sense of unease that went beyond normal pre-wedding jitters. Her body felt foreign to her, as if it belonged to someone else. But tomorrow was her wedding day, the culmination of months of planning and years of dreaming. Whatever was wrong would have to wait. Just one more day, she whispered to herself in the darkness. I can get through one more day. Outside her window, the desert night was quiet, except for the distant call of a coyote, a sound that had always comforted Jane, but now seemed like a warning she couldn't quite understand.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning of June 15th started like any other Saturday, except Jane woke up feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. Her head pounded with intensity she'd never experienced before, and when she tried to sit up in bed, the room spun violently around her. This wasn't the usual morning grogginess she'd been experiencing. This was something altogether different and terrifying. "Riley!" she called weakly to her roommate, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She tried again, louder this time, and heard Riley's footsteps in the hallway. "Jesus, Jane, you look terrible," Riley said as she appeared in the doorway, her nursing instincts immediately kicking in. She sat on the edge of Jane's bed and felt her forehead. "You're burning up. When did this start?" "I don't know," Jane admitted, struggling to focus on Riley's face. "I felt weird yesterday during the site visit in Glendale, but I thought it was just the heat. We were out there for 6 hours doing solar assessments." Riley grabbed her stethoscope from her nursing school bag and listened to Jane's heart. The rhythm was irregular, faster than it should be, with occasional skips that made Riley frown. "Your heart rate is all over the place. Have you been having any chest pain?" "Sometimes," Jane said, realizing for the first time that the occasional sharp pains she'd been feeling weren't normal. "But just little ones. I thought maybe I was sleeping wrong or something." Riley's expression grew more serious. "Jane, I think we need to get you to urgent care, like right now." But Jane's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget, final cake tasting at 2 p.m., then dinner with the Chens tonight. So excited." The wedding was just 2 weeks away. Jane had already taken several days off work for wedding preparations, and she couldn't afford to miss the cake tasting. The bakery, Sweet Dreams Confections in Old Town Scottsdale, had been booked for months. The Chen family was flying in from California specifically for tonight's dinner at Kai Restaurant, the award-winning Native American establishment at the Sheraton Grand. "I can't miss today," Jane said, forcing herself to sit up despite the waves of nausea. "There's too much happening. Maybe I just need some coffee and breakfast." Riley, despite her medical training, was still just a 23-year-old college student who'd never seen her best friend look so genuinely ill. "Are you sure? You really don't look good." "I'll be fine," Jane insisted, though even she didn't believe it. "If I still feel bad tomorrow, I'll go to the doctor then." The cake tasting was a disaster Jane would never forget. Sweet Dreams Confections was owned by Maria Santos, a renowned pastry chef who'd won multiple awards for her wedding cakes. The shop smelled like vanilla and butter, usually scents that would make Jane's mouth water. But as soon as they walked in, Jane felt overwhelming nausea. "Here are our 3 final options," Maria announced, presenting elegant squares of cake on delicate china plates. The lavender honey with vanilla buttercream, the chocolate espresso with salted caramel, and the lemon elderflower with cream cheese frosting. Jane's mother, Linda, was in full mother-of-the-bride mode, taking photos and asking detailed questions about serving sizes and decoration possibilities. Marcus stood beside Jane, holding her hand and occasionally glancing at her with concern. "You okay, babe?" he whispered as Jane stared at the cake samples without taking a bite. "Just tired," she lied, not wanting to worry him or ruin this moment her mother had been looking forward to for months. But when Jane finally tried the lavender honey cake, which had been her top choice for weeks, it tasted like cardboard. Worse, within minutes of eating it, she felt violently ill. She excused herself to the bathroom, where she spent 10 minutes dry-having, her reflection in the mirror showing a pale, sweaty stranger she barely recognized.
When she returned, her mother was discussing delivery logistics with Maria, while Marcus paced near the window, clearly worried. "Honey, you missed the best part," Linda said brightly. "Maria showed us the most beautiful sugar flowers she's going to make. They look just like the desert blooms in your engagement photos." Jane nodded and smiled, but the effort felt enormous. She agreed to whatever cake her mother preferred and signed the final contract with shaking hands, her signature looking nothing like her usual neat handwriting. The drive to Kai restaurant that evening was a blur of Phoenix traffic and mounting dread. Jane had spent the afternoon lying on the couch, unable to keep down more than a few sips of water. Riley had offered twice more to drive her to urgent care, but Jane kept insisting she just needed rest. Kai Restaurant was Marcus's choice, a place he'd wanted to share with both families as a representation of Arizona's native heritage. The restaurant was located on the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community land, and its menu featured traditional ingredients prepared with modern techniques. Jane had been looking forward to this dinner for weeks. It was meant to be a celebration of their upcoming union and a chance for both families to bond before the wedding.
The Chen family had arrived that morning from San Jose. Marcus's parents, David and Susan Chen, his grandmother Popo, and his younger sister Lisa, who was serving as a bridesmaid. They were staying at the Phoenician Resort, and Jane had planned to spend the next day showing them some of her favorite desert photography locations. "Jane, sweetheart, you look beautiful," Susan Chen said warmly as they were seated at a large table overlooking the restaurant's herb garden. Susan worked as a pediatric nurse and had always been kind to Jane, treating her like the daughter she'd never had. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Jane managed, though she felt anything but beautiful. She'd chosen a flowing sundress to hide her recent weight loss, but she still felt skeletal and fragile. The restaurant's sommelier presented wine pairings for their 7-course tasting menu, but Jane couldn't even consider alcohol. As the first course arrived, a delicate preparation of tepary bean hummus with native seeds, Jane realized she couldn't eat anything at all. "Not hungry?" asked Popo, Marcus's 92-year-old grandmother, who had insisted on making the trip despite her age. Popo had survived the Japanese-American internment camps during World War II and had always been Jane's favorite of Marcus's relatives. Her direct manner and sharp wit reminded Jane of her own late grandmother. "You're sure you're not sick, child?" Popo asked quietly while the others were distracted by the server's explanation of the second course. Jane met the older woman's gaze and felt tears threaten for the first time that day. "I don't know," she whispered honestly. Popo reached across the table and took Jane's hand in her small, strong fingers. "Your hands are shaking," she observed, "and your color is not good." "Please don't say anything," Jane begged. "I don't want to worry Marcus or ruin this dinner. The wedding is so close and everyone's so excited." Popo squeezed Jane's hand gently. "Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who can't see what's right in front of them. But your body is trying to tell you something important," she said cryptically. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of forced smiles and untouched plates. Jane's father told his usual stories about high school football coaching, while Linda and Susan discussed flower arrangements and photography schedules. Marcus and his father debated the latest developments in artificial intelligence, while Lisa showed Jane photos from her recent graduation from UC Davis. But Jane felt like she was watching the scene from outside her body, as if she was floating above the table looking down at a young woman who was slowly disappearing. Every laugh felt hollow. Every smile required tremendous effort, and the constant tremor in her hands was getting harder to hide. When Marcus walked her to her car afterward, he finally voiced his growing concern. "Jane, I'm worried about you. You've lost so much weight, and you barely ate anything tonight. Maybe we should postpone the wedding and figure out what's going on." For a moment, Jane considered agreeing.
The thought of admitting something was wrong and getting help felt like relief. But then she imagined the disappointment on her mother's face, the disruption to everyone's plans, the deposits they'd lose, and the embarrassment of being the bride who couldn't handle her own wedding. "I'm fine," she said firmly. "It's just pre-wedding stress. Everyone says it's normal." But Marcus looked unconvinced, but he'd learned not to push when Jane used that particular tone of voice. "Okay, but promise me that if you feel worse, you'll see a doctor." "I promise," Jane said, another lie that tasted bitter on her tongue. That night, as Jane lay in bed staring at the ceiling and feeling her heart race irregularly in her chest, she made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. She would get through the wedding, no matter what it took. After that, she'd deal with whatever was wrong with her body. She had no way of knowing that she might not survive that long, or that sometimes the biggest danger comes not from the illness itself, but from the people who love you refusing to see it until it's almost too late.
The Monday morning after the disastrous dinner at Kai Restaurant, Jean woke up to 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. But instead of wedding-related updates, they were all from Dr. Elena Rodriguez at Solar Vision Consulting. "Jane, where are you? The Henderson City Council presentation is in 2 hours, and you have all the files," read the most recent text, sent just 20 minutes ago. Jane bolted upright in bed, immediately regretting this sudden movement as her head spun violently. She had completely forgotten about the presentation, a crucial pitch for a $2.3 million solar installation project that could make or break Solar Vision's expansion into Nevada. She was supposed to present the environmental impact analysis and cost-benefit projections to a room full of city officials who had flown in specifically for this meeting. Her hands shook as she speed-dialed Dr. Rodriguez's number while stumbling toward her closet to find appropriate clothes. "Jean, thank God," Dr. Rodriguez answered on the first ring. "Are you okay? This isn't like you at all." "I'm so sorry, Elena. I overslept and my alarm didn't go off and—" Jane trailed off, realizing how pathetic she sounded. The truth was, she'd been awake most of the night with chest pains and only fallen into a fitful sleep around 4 a.m. "Look, I've already moved the presentation to this afternoon," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice professional but concerned. "But Jane, I need to ask, are you having second thoughts about this job? Because if wedding planning is becoming overwhelming, we need to discuss your workload." "No, absolutely not," Jane said quickly, though even speaking felt exhausting. "I love this job. This project is everything I've worked toward. I'll be there in an hour." As Jane drove toward the Solar Vision offices in Scottsdale, she caught herself in the rearview mirror at a red light. The woman staring back looked hollow-eyed and gaunt, her cheekbones sharp in a way they'd never been before. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself at all. The presentation that afternoon was a nightmare Jane would replay in her mind for years. She had spent the morning reviewing her notes and rehearsing her talking points, but when she stood in front of the Henderson City Council members, her mind went blank. The numbers she had memorized jumbled together, and she found herself reading directly from her slides, something she'd never done before. "Ms. Brook, could you elaborate on the 10-year maintenance projections?" asked Councilwoman Patricia Hayes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who clearly knew her stuff. Jane stared at the slide showing maintenance costs, but the numbers seemed to swim before her eyes. She'd calculated these figures herself just 2 weeks ago, but now they might as well have been written in a foreign language. "The maintenance, Jane started, then felt a wave of dizziness so intense she had to grip the podium to stay upright. "I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?" Dr. Rodriguez, who was sitting in the back of the conference room, quickly stood up. "Perhaps we should take a 5-minute break," she announced, smoothly, though Jane could see the alarm in her mentor's eyes. During the break, Dr. Rodriguez pulled Jane aside in the hallway. "What's going on? You know this material better than anyone. You've been working on Henderson for 3 months." "I'm fine,"
Jane insisted, the automatic response that had become her default. Just tired from wedding planning. You know how it is? But Dr. Rodriguez, who had a PhD in environmental engineering and had mentored dozens of young professionals over her 15-year career, wasn't buying it. Jane, I've known you for 8 months. You don't forget presentations. You don't stumble over data you could recite in your sleep. And you certainly don't look like you haven't slept in weeks. Jane felt tears threaten, something that would have been unthinkable just a month ago. She prided herself on being professional and composed, especially at work. "It's just stress," she whispered. "When's the last time you saw a doctor?" Dr. Rodriguez asked gently. "I don't need a doctor," Jane said more sharply than she intended. "I need everyone to stop treating me like I'm fragile. I can handle my job and my wedding." Dr. Rodriguez studied Jane's face for a long moment. "Okay, but I want you to take the rest of the week off. Non-negotiable." "Elena, please, I can't. There's so much to finish before the wedding, and we have the Phoenix Sky Harbor project review on Friday." "Tom can handle Sky Harbor," Dr. Rodriguez said, referring to Jane's colleague. "And everything else can wait. You're no good to me or this company if you collapse from exhaustion." The word collapse sent a chill through Jane that she couldn't explain. She agreed to take the time off, though she had no intention of resting. That evening, Jane sat in her apartment with wedding planning materials spread across her coffee table. Riley was working a shift at the hospital where she did her nursing clinicals, leaving Jane alone with a mountain of tasks that seemed to grow larger by the hour.
The florist needed final confirmation on the centerpiece arrangements. The photographer wanted to schedule a final consultation about timeline and shot lists. The caterer was requesting a final head count. The venue coordinator had questions about the ceremony setup. Each email and phone call felt like climbing a mountain. Jane's phone rang, and she saw her sister Michelle's name on the screen. "Hey, bride-to-be, how was work today?" Michelle asked cheerfully. Michelle worked as a marketing coordinator for a luxury resort chain and always seemed to have endless energy for everyone else's problems. "Fine," Jane said automatically, though her voice sounded foreign even to herself. "You sound weird. Are you getting sick? You better not get sick before your wedding. I remember when Cousin Sarah got the flu 3 days before hers and looked terrible in all her photos." "I'm not getting sick," Jane said, though she wondered if Michelle might be right. Maybe this was just a really bad case of the flu that was taking forever to resolve. "Good, because Mom is in full panic mode about the rehearsal dinner. She's convinced the restaurant is going to mess up the seating arrangements, and she's been calling them twice a day. You need to call her and calm her down." After Michelle hung up, Jane stared at her phone, overwhelmed by the thought of making even one more phone call. Her mother had left 3 voicemails that day, each one more frantic than the last about various wedding details. Instead of calling back, Jane opened her laptop and tried to focus on the guest seating chart that still needed finalization. But as she stared at the names on the screen, they began to blur together. She rubbed her eyes, thinking she just needed better lighting, but the blurriness persisted. That's when Jane noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her hands, resting on the keyboard, were trembling so violently that she couldn't type properly. This wasn't the subtle shaking she'd been experiencing. This was visible, uncontrollable tremor that made it impossible to perform basic tasks. For the first time since this ordeal began, Jane felt genuinely scared. She grabbed her phone and started to dial Riley's number, then stopped. Riley was at work and couldn't help anyway. She considered calling Marcus, but he was at a bachelor party planning session with his groomsmen. Almost without thinking, she found herself dialing the number for Urgent Care of Tempe, the clinic near her apartment. "Urgent Care, this is Jessica. How can I help you?" "Hi, I think I might need to be seen," Jane said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What seems to be the problem?" I tried to explain the fatigue, the dizziness, the trembling, the weight loss, the racing heart, but as she listed the symptoms out loud, they sounded almost too dramatic to be real.
Are you experiencing any chest pain or difficulty breathing? Sometimes, Jane admitted. We can see you tonight if you'd like. We're open until 9 p.m. Jane looked at the clock. It was 7:30. She could drive there now, be seen by 8, and hopefully get some answers that would put her mind at ease. Maybe they'd give her some medicine for stress or recommend a vitamin supplement. Maybe they'd confirm that this was all just wedding nerves and exhaustion. But then she looked at the coffee table covered with wedding tasks, thought about her mother's frantic voicemails, considered the disappointment on Dr. Rodriguez's face if she found out Jane was sick enough to need medical care, and imagined Marcus's worry if she told him she'd gone to urgent care. Actually, never mind, Jane told Jessica. I think I'm just tired. Thanks anyway. She hung up the phone and immediately regretted it. For a brief moment, she'd been ready to take the first step towards getting help. But the weight of everyone's expectations and her own stubborn determination not to be the bride who couldn't handle her own wedding had won out again. Instead, Jane opened her laptop and forced herself to work on the seating chart, typing with trembling fingers and stopping every few minutes when dizziness overwhelmed her. She told herself that after the wedding, she'd take a proper vacation and get a complete physical. She'd deal with whatever this was once she didn't have 200 people depending on her to pull off the perfect day. As midnight approached and Jane finally gave up on the seating chart, she had managed to place only half the guests after 4 hours of work, she made a decision that felt both brave and terrifying. She would push through the next 10 days no matter what it took. She would be the bride her family expected her to be, the employee Dr. Rodriguez believed in, and the partner Marcus deserved. She had no way of knowing that her body was already beginning to shut down, or that her determination to be perfect was about to put her life in serious danger. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help, but Jane wasn't ready for that kind of courage yet.
The Thursday morning, exactly 1 week before her wedding, Jane woke up on her bathroom floor with no memory of how she'd gotten there. Her cheek was pressed against the cold tile, and dried blood crusted around a small cut on her forehead where she'd apparently hit the edge of the vanity. Riley found her there 20 minutes later when she came home from her overnight shift at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Jesus Christ, Jane! Riley dropped her nursing bag and knelt beside her roommate, immediately checking for signs of head trauma. What happened? How long have you been here? Jane struggled to sit up, the bathroom spinning around her like a carnival ride. I don't know. I got up to use the bathroom around 2 a.m. and then nothing. Riley helped Jane to the living room couch and began a systematic assessment she'd learned in her trauma rotation. Pulse rapid and irregular, blood pressure dangerously low when she sat up, pupils dilated and slow to respond to light, skin pale and clammy despite the June heat already building outside their apartment. Jane, you passed out and hit your head. We're going to the ER right now, Riley said, grabbing her car keys with shaking hands. No. The word came out more forcefully than Jane had spoken in weeks. Absolutely not. Are you insane? You have a head injury. You could have a concussion or worse. I said no. Jane stood up too quickly and immediately regretted it as black spots danced across her vision, but she remained upright through sheer willpower. I just need to get through the next few days and then I'll relax. It's just stress and wedding planning. Everyone keeps saying it's normal. Riley stared at her best friend as if seeing a stranger. Jane, listen to yourself. Normal brides don't pass out and wake up on bathroom floors with head injuries. Normal people don't lose 25 pounds in 2 months. Normal people don't have hearts that skip beats like yours has been doing. You're not a doctor yet, Jane said, hating herself even as the words left her mouth. You're a nursing student. You don't know what you're talking about. The hurt that flashed across Riley's face was immediate and devastating. They'd been best friends since freshman orientation at ASU, had supported each other through failed relationships, family crises, and academic struggles. Jane had never spoken to Riley with such cruelty. You know what? You're right. I'm not a doctor.
Riley said quietly, collecting her nursing supplies with sharp, angry movements. But I know what sick looks like, and I know what denial looks like, and right now I'm looking at both. Riley left for class without another word, slamming the apartment door so hard that Jane's collection of desert landscape photographs rattled on their hooks. Alone in the apartment, Jane caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror and felt a shock of recognition mixed with denial. The woman looking back at her was gaunt, hollow-eyed, and fragile-looking. Her engagement ring, which had fit perfectly 6 months earlier, now slipped around on her finger. The cut on her forehead had already begun to swell, adding to the overall appearance of someone who was seriously unwell. But instead of calling a doctor, Jane called her mother. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? You sound terrible," Linda said immediately upon hearing Jane's voice. "I passed out last night and woke up on the bathroom floor. Riley thinks I should go to the emergency room." "Oh, sweetheart." Linda's voice took on the soothing tone she'd used when Jane was a child with scraped knees and hurt feelings. "You know how Riley is. She's studying all these medical things and sees symptoms everywhere. Remember when she was convinced she had appendicitis during finals last semester?" Jane wanted to point out that Riley had actually been right about having appendicitis and ended up in surgery 2 days later, but her mother continued before she could speak. "Honey, I know this is scary, but every woman in our family has been through this. I fainted twice during my engagement to my father, once at the grocery store and once at church. Your grandmother told me she was so nervous before her wedding that she couldn't keep food down for a week. It's just how our bodies react to big life changes." "But what if it's not just nerves?" Jane pressed, though she could already feel her resolve weakening under her mother's comforting certainty.
"Then we'll deal with it after the wedding," Linda said firmly. "In 6 days, you'll be Mrs. Chen, and then you can take a long honeymoon and get back to feeling like yourself. But right now, we have a wedding to finish planning and 200 guests who are counting on you." After hanging up, Jane sat in her living room surrounded by wedding planning materials and made a decision that would change everything. She walked to her bedroom, opened the top drawer of her dresser, and pulled out a small notebook she'd been keeping since college, a place where she wrote down important goals and commitments to herself. With trembling hands, she wrote, "June 21st, I will marry Marcus Chen no matter what. I will not let my family down. I will not let fear control my life. After the wedding, I can deal with anything, but nothing will stop me from becoming Mrs. Chen." She tore out the page and taped it to her bathroom mirror, right next to the spot where she'd apparently hit her head during the fall. The next 3 days passed in a blur of determined activity. Jane threw herself into wedding preparations with an intensity that bordered on manic. She finalized the seating chart, despite having to stop frequently when her vision blurred. She confirmed every vendor appointment, speaking clearly and professionally, even when her heart raced so fast she could barely breathe. She attended her final dress fitting, where the seamstress had to take in the gown another 2 inches. "Wow, you really committed to that pre-wedding diet," said Isabella Rodriguez, the seamstress at Elegante Bridal. "Most brides gain weight from stress eating, but you've gone the other direction." "I've always been naturally thin," Jane lied, avoiding her reflection in the 3-way mirror where the wedding dress now hung loose in places it had fit perfectly just weeks ago. On Saturday afternoon, Jane drove to Papago Park for what she planned to be her final photography session before the wedding. She'd always found peace and clarity behind her camera lens, and she hoped that capturing the desert landscape she loved might help calm her increasingly chaotic thoughts. But as soon as she started hiking toward her favorite spot overlooking Hole in the Rock, Jane realized she'd made a terrible mistake. The moderate trail that she had walked dozens of times now felt like climbing Mount Everest. After just 5 minutes, she had to stop and sit on a boulder, gasping for breath and feeling her heart pound against her ribs. A family hiking past stopped to check on her. "Are you okay, miss?" asked a concerned father carrying a toddler on his shoulders. "Just taking a break," Jane managed, forcing a smile despite feeling like she might pass out again. "Do you need water? You look really pale," the man's wife offered, holding out a water bottle. Jane accepted the water gratefully, though her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the bottle. As she drank, she caught the worried glances the couple exchanged, the same look she'd been seeing on people's faces more and more lately. Instead of continuing with her photography session, Jane drove to Desert Botanical Garden, the venue where her wedding reception would take place in just 5 days. She wanted to walk through the space one more time, to visualize herself dancing with Marcus under the string lights, to imagine the happiness that was supposed to come after all this suffering. The garden was beautiful in the late afternoon light, with the desert plants casting long shadows and the mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. Jane found the exact spot where her sweetheart table would be positioned and stood there for a long moment, trying to feel excited about her approaching wedding day. But instead of excitement, she felt only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a growing sense of unreality, as if she was planning someone else's wedding and watching someone else's life from the outside. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Can't wait to marry you in 5 days. You're going to be the most beautiful bride Arizona has ever seen. I love you more than the stars in the desert sky." Jane stared at the text for a long time before responding, "I love you too. Can't wait to be your wife." As she typed the words, Jane made a silent vow that felt both sacred and desperate. She would make it to that altar no matter what her body was trying to tell her. She would speak those vows and dance at her reception and smile for every photo. She would be the bride everyone expected her to be. She had no way of knowing that her body was already preparing to make that decision for her, or that sometimes the most dangerous promises we make are the ones we make to ourselves when we're too proud to ask for help. But for now, Jane drove home to her apartment, taped another motivational note next to the first one on her bathroom mirror, and began preparing for the most important performance of her life.
The Monday before her wedding, Jane arrived at the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport at 6 a.m. to pick up Marcus's extended family flying in from California. Despite having slept only 2 hours due to heart palpitations that kept jolting her awake, she'd applied concealer under her eyes and put on her brightest smile. Today was about being the perfect future daughter-in-law, no matter what it cost her. Marcus's Aunt Helen and Uncle Robert were on the first flight, followed by his cousins Jennifer and Michael with their 3 young children. Jane had met them only once before, at Marcus's college graduation 2 years ago, but they'd always been warm and welcoming. She was determined to make a good impression, especially since Helen had offered to help with last-minute wedding coordination. "Jane, you look so bridal," Helen exclaimed as she emerged from the security area, though Jane caught the slight hesitation and the concerned glance Helen exchanged with her husband. "Thank you for coming so early in the week," Jane said, hugging each family member, despite feeling like her arms might give out from the effort. "Marcus is so excited to have everyone here." As they loaded luggage into Jane's Honda CR-V and Marcus's borrowed truck, 3-year-old Emma, Jennifer's youngest, kept staring at Jane with the brutal honesty that only small children possess. "Why are you so skinny?" Emma asked suddenly from her car seat. "Are you sick?" "Emma, that's not polite," Jennifer said quickly, but Jane saw the worry in the young mother's eyes. "I'm just excited about my wedding," Jane told Emma, forcing a laugh. "Sometimes people get so happy they forget to eat." The drive to the hotel should have been a pleasant 20-minute trip filled with catching up and wedding excitement. Instead, it became an endurance test that Jane barely survived. The morning Phoenix traffic was particularly brutal, with temperatures already climbing toward 110 degrees despite the early hour. Jane's air conditioning was struggling, and she found herself gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. Halfway to the hotel, Jane realized she was having trouble seeing clearly. The cars in front of her seemed to blur together, and she had to blink repeatedly to bring them into focus. When a semi-truck changed lanes suddenly, Jane's reaction time was so low that she barely avoided a collision. "Everything okay up there?" Uncle Robert asked from the passenger seat. his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying not to alarm the children. "Just focused on the traffic," Jane replied, though sweat was now pouring down her back despite the air conditioning. At the Marriott Resort in Scottsdale, Jane helped the Chen family check in and get settled. She'd planned to take them to breakfast at the hotel restaurant, then give them a tour of some Phoenix attractions. But as they stood in the elegant lobby with its soaring ceilings and desert-themed artwork, Jane felt the familiar waves of dizziness threatening to overwhelm her. "You know what? I just remembered I have an appointment with the florist this morning," Jane lied smoothly. "But Helen, would you mind if I called you later about helping with the rehearsal dinner setup?" "Of course, dear," Helen said, though her nursing background, she was a pediatric nurse like Marcus's mother, made her particularly attuned to signs of distress. "Are you feeling all right? You seem a bit off." "Just wedding jitters," Jane said, the phrase that had become her automatic response to any expression of concern. Instead of going home to rest, Jane drove to Paradise Valley to meet with Carmen Rodriguez, the wedding coordinator at Desert Botanical Garden. Carmen had been in the wedding industry for 15 years and had seen every possible crisis, from runaway grooms to monsoon storms that flooded outdoor venues. "Jane, just 4 days to go. How are you feeling?" Carmen asked as they walked through the garden's Desert Discovery Trail, checking the final setup locations. "Great," Jane said, though she had to stop and pretend to admire a blooming ghost plant when dizziness made the pathway seem to tilt beneath her feet. Carmen showed Jane where the ceremony arch would be positioned, perfectly framed by a grove of towering saguaro cacti. They reviewed the timeline for Saturday. Guests would arrive at 5 p.m. for the ceremony, followed by cocktail hour in the succulent garden, then dinner and dancing on the desert terrace until 11 p.m. The weather forecast looks perfect. Clear skies, low humidity, a high of 105 degrees. Carmen made notes on her tablet. We'll have the misting stations running and plenty of shade structures. As they walked through the reception area, Jane tried to visualize herself dancing with Marcus under the desert stars, but instead of excitement, she felt only a growing sense of panic. How was she going to survive 6 hours of being on for 200 guests when she could barely make it through a 30-minute venue walkthrough? "Carmen, what happens if a bride, hypothetically, gets sick during the wedding?" Jane asked, trying to sound casual. Carmen looked up from her tablet with the expression of someone who had heard this question many times before. "Honey, are you feeling okay? You look a little pale."
I'm fine, just curious. I mean, what's the protocol? Well, we always have a first aid station and an EMT on standby for large events, Carmen said. But in 15 years, I've never had a bride get seriously ill during a ceremony. Are you worried about something specific? Jane wanted to tell Carmen everything. About the fainting, the heart palpitations, the weight loss, the growing sense that her body was shutting down. But the words stuck in her throat. "No, just planning for every possibility," Jane said instead. That afternoon, Jane had scheduled a spa day with her bridal party at the Phoenician Spa. Riley, her sister Michelle, Marcus's sister Lisa, and her cousin Sarah were all meeting for massages, facials, and manicures, a tradition Jane's mother had insisted would help her relax before the big day. But when Jane arrived at the luxury spa, she could barely make it from the parking lot to the entrance without stopping for rest. The other women were already there, lounging in plush robes and sipping cucumber water in the relaxation room. "There's our bride," Michelle called out, but Jane saw her sister's expression change when she got a good look at her. "Jane, you look tired," Lisa finished diplomatically, though her concern was obvious. Riley hadn't spoken to Jane since their fight on Thursday morning, but when she saw Jane struggling to change into her spa robe, her nursing instincts overrode their personal conflict. "Jane, we need to talk," Riley said quietly, pulling her aside into a private alcove. "If you're going to lecture me about seeing a doctor, save it," Jane said, though her voice lacked its usual force. "I'm scared,"
Riley said simply. "You're my best friend, and I'm watching you disappear in front of my eyes. This isn't just wedding stress. This is something serious." For a moment, Jane wavered. Riley's obvious fear and genuine love almost broke through the wall of denial she'd built around herself. But then she heard Michelle calling for them to come get their massages, and the moment passed. "I just need to get through Saturday. After that, I promise I'll get help if I still feel bad." The massage should have been relaxing, but Jane spent the entire hour fighting waves of nausea and dizziness. When the masseuse, Maria Santos, no relation to the cake maker, worked on Jane's neck and shoulders, she paused with concern. "Your muscles are incredibly tense, and your heart rate seems very elevated. Are you feeling anxious about your wedding?" "A little," Jane admitted. "Have you been having trouble sleeping? Your body feels like it's in a constant state of stress response." Jane wanted to tell Maria that, yes, she had been having trouble sleeping because her heart kept racing and she'd wake up drenched in sweat. She wanted to admit that she felt like her body was at war with itself, but instead she just nodded and asked Maria to focus on lighter pressure. During the facial portion of their spa day, the esthetician, Jennifer Kim, had to stop the treatment twice because Jane's skin was so sensitive that even gentle products caused irritation. "Have you been using any new medications or supplements? Sometimes brides try crash diets or take stimulants before their wedding, and it can really affect your skin." "Nothing like that," Jane said, though she wondered if whatever was wrong with her was affecting her skin's ability to tolerate normal products. At the manicure station, Jane had to ask the technician to stop twice because her hands were shaking too badly for precise work. She ended up with a simple, clear polish instead of the elaborate nail art she had originally planned. "Nerves getting to you?" asked the nail technician Nancy. "Something like that," Jane replied. As the spa day concluded, Jane's bridal party gathered in the relaxation room for champagne and strawberries, a celebration that felt more like a wake to Jane. The other women chatted excitedly about Saturday's ceremony, but Jane felt like she was watching the scene from underwater. "To Jane," Michelle said, raising her champagne flute, "the most beautiful bride Arizona will ever see." As everyone toasted, Jane noticed that Riley barely touched her champagne and kept stealing worried glances in her direction. Lisa, Marcus's sister, seemed to be studying Jane's appearance with growing concern. Even Sarah, her usually oblivious cousin, looked troubled. "Jane, honey, are you sure you're feeling okay? You just seem different." "I'm perfect," Jane said, the lie coming easier than breathing now. "Just ready to marry the love of my life." But as she sat there surrounded by the women who loved her most, Jane felt more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. She was lying to everyone, including herself, about the severity of her condition. And with each passing hour, her body was making it clear that it wouldn't wait that long. That night, as Jane lay in bed staring at the ceiling and feeling her heart skip beats in an increasingly erratic rhythm, she made one final bargain with herself. She would make it through the rehearsal dinner on Friday and the wedding on Saturday. After that, she would face whatever was happening to her body. She had no way of knowing that her body had already decided it wouldn't wait that long.
Friday morning, the day before her wedding, Jane woke up to find she couldn't get out of bed. Not because she was tired or reluctant, her body simply wouldn't respond to her commands. Her legs felt like lead weights, her arms trembled with the effort of reaching for her phone, and when she tried to sit up, the room spun so violently that she had to lie back down immediately. This was the morning of her rehearsal and rehearsal dinner, 12 hours packed with final preparations that required her to be alert, mobile, and charming for extended family members she hadn't seen in years. Instead, she was trapped in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, where she'd stayed the night according to wedding tradition, unable to perform the most basic functions. "Jane, honey, breakfast is ready," her mother called from downstairs, the cheerful voice carrying up through the old house like a reminder of everything Jane was about to disappoint. Jane tried to respond, but even the effort of calling back felt monumental. She managed a weak "coming" that probably didn't carry beyond her bedroom door. For the next 20 minutes, Jane lay in bed practicing what she would say to explain why she looked and felt so terrible.
She settled on claiming she had food poisoning from something she'd eaten at the spa the day before. It was believable, temporary, and wouldn't require anyone to cancel wedding plans. When she finally made it downstairs, moving slowly and gripping the banister for support, she found her parents and sister Michelle gathered around the kitchen table with wedding timelines spread between coffee cups and breakfast plates. "There's our bride," her father Robert said, with the forced cheer of someone trying to maintain morale. But Jane saw the way his smile faltered when he got a good look at her face. "Sweetheart, you look awful," her mother said, dropping all pretense. Linda had been a teacher for 23 years and had developed an ability to spot genuinely sick children from across a classroom. "What's wrong?" "I think I have food poisoning," she said, easing herself into a chair with the caution of someone 3 times her age. "Something from the spa yesterday didn't agree with me." Michelle looked up from her timeline checklist, her marketing coordinator instincts immediately shifting into crisis management mode. "Okay, that's manageable. Food poisoning usually lasts 12 to 24 hours. You'll feel better by tonight and definitely by tomorrow." "Should we call Dr. Patterson?" Linda asked, referring to their longtime family physician. "Maybe he can prescribe something to help you get through today." For a moment, Jane considered agreeing. Dr. Patterson had been her pediatrician and had continued as her family doctor into adulthood. He knew her medical history, would take her symptoms seriously, and might actually figure out what was wrong with her. But Dr. Patterson would also ask difficult questions, might want to run tests, and could potentially recommend delaying the wedding. The thought of disappointing 200 guests, losing thousands of dollars in deposits, and admitting that she couldn't handle her own wedding day filled Jane with a panic that temporarily overrode her physical symptoms. "No, I'll be fine," Jane insisted. "I just need to take it easy this morning." The rehearsal was scheduled for 4 p.m. at St. Mary's Cathedral, followed by dinner at Scottsdale Plaza Resort. Between now and then, Jane had a hair appointment, a meeting with the photographer to go over the shot list, and final coordination calls with 3 different vendors. "I can handle the vendor calls," Michelle offered, already reaching for her phone. "And Mom can go with you to the hair appointment." "I don't need a babysitter," Jane snapped, immediately regretting her tone when she saw the hurt in her mother's eyes. "I'm sorry, I need to do these things myself." But even as she said it, she knew she was living in denial. Standing up from the kitchen table required genuine effort, and the short walk to her car felt like running a marathon. When she attempted to drive to her hair appointment at Salon Bella Vista in downtown Scottsdale, she had to pull over twice because her vision kept blurring and her hands were shaking too badly to maintain proper control of the steering wheel. At the salon, hairstylist Gabriela Morales had planned an elaborate updo with cascading curls and delicate pearl accessories, a style they'd practiced twice before. But within minutes of starting, Gabriela realized something was seriously wrong. "Jane, your scalp is incredibly sensitive today," Gabriela observed as Jane winced at even gentle brushing. "And you're sweating quite a bit. Are you feeling okay?" "Just nervous," Jane said, though her reflection in the salon mirror showed a woman who looked more like a patient in a hospital than a bride on her wedding eve. Gabriela, who had been styling brides' hair for 8 years, had never seen anyone look quite so unwell the day before their wedding. Jane's skin had a grayish pallor, her hands trembled constantly, and she kept closing her eyes as if the salon's normal lighting was too bright to tolerate. "Would you like me to try a simpler style?" Gabriela suggested gently. "Maybe something that won't require as much time in the chair?" Jane wanted to agree, but sitting upright for 2 hours felt impossible. This hair appointment represented months of planning and multiple trial runs. Her mother had specifically chosen the salon because Gabriela had won awards for bridal styling. "No, let's stick with the original plan," Jane said, gripping the arms of the salon chair and forcing herself to remain still. The next 2 hours were torture. Jane had to ask Gabriela to stop 4 times when waves of nausea threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't keep her head steady, making it difficult for Gabriela to create the precise curls and intricate pinning the style required. By the time it was finished, Jane looked beautiful from a distance, but up close, anyone could see that her face was the wrong color, and her eyes had a glassy, unfocused quality.
"Are you sure you don't want me to call someone?" Gabriella asked, as Jane paid for the service with visibly shaking hands. "You really don't look well." "I'm fine," Jane said automatically, though she had to grip the reception desk to stay upright. The meeting with photographer David Kim at the Cathedral was supposed to be a quick walkthrough of Saturday's timeline and shot locations. David had photographed hundreds of weddings and prided himself on capturing the joy and excitement of couples on their special day. But as soon as he saw Jane, his expression shifted to concern. "Jane, are you feeling all right?" David asked as they stood in the cathedral's center aisle, where Jane would walk in less than 24 hours. "You seem very subdued today." "Just overwhelmed with final details," Jane said, though speaking felt like an enormous effort. As they reviewed the shot list, first look photos in the bridal suite, ceremony processional, family portraits, reception candids, Jane found herself unable to focus on David's words. The cathedral's vaulted ceilings seemed to pulse and sway above her, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows felt aggressive and harsh. "For the family portraits, we'll want to move quickly since we're shooting in June heat. Some brides get overheated in their gowns." Jane almost laughed at the irony. Overheated would be the least of her problems tomorrow. "I'll be fine," she said, the lie so automatic now that she barely registered saying it. The rehearsal itself was a disaster that everyone politely pretended was normal. Jane struggled to walk down the aisle at a consistent pace, stopping twice because dizziness made her feel like she might fall. When Father Martinez, the priest who would marry them, asked her to repeat her vows during the practice run, Jane's voice was so weak that the wedding party in the front pew couldn't hear her. "Just save your voice for tomorrow," Marcus said gently, though Jane could see the worry he was trying to hide. He'd been watching her deteriorate for weeks. But like everyone else, he'd accepted her explanations about stress and wedding pressure. Marcus's grandmother Popo, however, was not so easily fooled. During a quiet moment while the wedding party practiced their processional, the 92-year-old woman approached Jane with the directness of someone who'd lived through too much to waste time on politeness. "You're going to die if you don't get help," Popo said simply, her weathered hand touching Jane's arm with surprising gentleness. "Jane? What?" "I've seen this before, during the war, in the camps. People who were so determined to keep going that they ignored their bodies until it was too late." Popo's dark eyes held decades of wisdom and sorrow. "You have the look of someone whose body is shutting down." "Popo, I'm just tired. Jane, don't lie to me. I may be old, but I'm not foolish." Popo glanced around to make sure no one else could hear them. "Whatever is wrong with you, it's serious. More serious than a wedding." Jane felt tears threaten for the first time in days. "But everyone is here. The flowers are ordered, the cake is made. 200 people are expecting. 200 people would rather see you alive and healthy than married and dead," Popo said bluntly. "But you're too proud to disappoint them, aren't you?" Before Jane could respond, her mother called for family photos and the moment was lost. But Popo's words echoed in Jane's mind for the rest of the evening. The rehearsal dinner at Scottsdale Plaza Resort should have been a celebration of love, family, and the coming union of two families. Instead, Jane spent the evening feeling like she was watching someone else's life from the outside. She barely touched her food, spoke only when directly addressed, and had to excuse herself to the bathroom 3 times when waves of dizziness made it impossible to sit upright. "Tomorrow's the big day," Marcus's father David announced during toasts, raising his wine glass toward the head table where Jane sat beside Marcus like a beautiful statue. "To Jane and Marcus," the crowd chorused, but Jane could barely lift her water glass to acknowledge the toast. As the evening wound down, Jane's parents approached her with expressions she couldn't read. "Sweetheart, we need to talk," her father said quietly. Jane's heart sank. Had they finally seen through her act? Were they going to insist on medical attention? "We're so proud of you," her mother said, taking Jane's cold hands in hers. "You've planned the most beautiful wedding, and tomorrow you're going to be the perfect bride." Jane realized with growing horror that even now, even looking as terrible as she felt, her parents still saw what they wanted to see, rather than what was actually in front of her. "I love you," Jane whispered, and for the first time it sounded like goodbye.
Saturday, June 21st, Jane's wedding day, began at 4:47 a.m. when her heart stopped beating for 12 seconds. She woke up on the floor of the bridal suite at the Omni Scottsdale Resort, gasping and choking, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The last thing she remembered was getting up to use the bathroom around 4:30 a.m. Now she was lying on cold marble tile, her white silk pajamas soaked with sweat, and her chest feeling like someone had parked a truck on it. The bridal suite was supposed to be Jane's sanctuary for getting ready, a luxurious space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the McDowell Mountains, where she would transform into the perfect bride with the help of her glam squad. Instead, it had become the place where her body finally stopped pretending it could carry her through one more day. Jane managed to crawl to her phone and check the time. In 7 hours, she was supposed to walk down the aisle at St. Mary's Cathedral. In 6 hours, her hair and makeup team would arrive. In 5 hours, her bridesmaids would bring breakfast and champagne for their traditional getting ready celebration. She had to pull herself together. Using the wall for support, Jane hauled herself upright and looked in the bathroom mirror. The face staring back was unrecognizable. Sunken cheeks, dark circles under glassy eyes, skin the color of old newspaper. This wasn't a bride having pre-wedding jitters. This was someone who was dying. The word hit her like a physical blow. Dying. Popo had said it yesterday, but Jane had pushed it away. Now, alone in this expensive hotel suite with her heart still fluttering irregularly in her chest, she couldn't deny it anymore. Jane's phone buzzed with a text from Riley. "I know we haven't been talking, but I love you. Whatever happens today, please be safe." The message broke something inside Jane that had been holding together through sheer stubbornness. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to truly consider what would happen if she collapsed during the ceremony. She imagined Marcus watching his bride fall to the cathedral floor. She pictured her parents' horror, the guests' confusion, the paramedics working over her in her wedding dress while 200 people looked on in shock. But even worse was imagining what would happen if she didn't collapse, if she somehow made it through the ceremony and reception, only to die in her sleep that night or during their honeymoon. Marcus would wake up next to his dead wife of one day. Her parents would lose their daughter just hours after celebrating her greatest happiness. At 5:30 a.m., Jane called the one person she knew would tell her the truth without sugarcoating it. "Popo, it's Jane. I'm sorry to wake you so early." Marcus's grandmother was already awake, as she had been most of the night. At 92, she'd developed the elderly person's habit of sleeping lightly, but more than that, she'd been worried about Jane since their conversation at the rehearsal dinner. "I've been waiting for your call," Popo said simply. I think I might be really sick," Jane whispered, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff. "I know you are, child. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Jane looked around the bridal suite at her wedding dress hanging on the closet door, at the shoes she had chosen to match her grandmother's pearls, and the bouquet of desert wildflowers waiting in a vase of water. "Everyone will be so disappointed," Jane said, tears finally coming. "Everyone will be devastated if you die," Popo replied with characteristic bluntness. "Disappointed they can handle. Dead granddaughter-in-law? Not so much." At 6 a.m., Jane made the hardest phone call of her life. "Marcus, I need you to come to my room. Alone. Right now." Marcus, who had been lying awake in his own hotel room worrying about Jane, arrived within 3 minutes, still in his pajamas and looking panicked. "What's wrong? You sound—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her, really saw her, for the first time in weeks. The careful makeup and strategic lighting that had been hiding the worst of her deterioration were gone, replaced by harsh morning sunlight and brutal honesty. "Jesus, Jane, what happened to you?" Jane collapsed on the couch, her legs finally giving out completely. "I'm sick, Marcus. Really sick. I have been for months."
Marcus knelt beside her, his software engineer's mind immediately trying to problem solve. "Okay, we'll get you to a doctor. After the wedding, we can—" "No." Jane grabbed his hands with strength she didn't know she still had. I can't make it through the wedding. I think I might die if I try." The words hung in the air between them like a bomb that had just detonated. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, fear, and finally, terrible understanding. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "I've been telling myself it was just stress, but deep down, probably since the night we had dinner with your family. Maybe longer. Why didn't you tell me?" Jane looked at this man she loved more than her own life and tried to find words for the complex web of pride, fear, and misguided love that had brought them to this moment. "Because I wanted to be perfect for you. Because everyone kept saying it was normal. Because I was terrified that if I admitted something was wrong, I'd have to face losing everything we'd planned." She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. "And because I was afraid that if you knew how sick I really am, you might not want to marry me at all." Marcus's expression shifted to something Jane had never seen before, a combination of love and frustration so intense it took her breath away. "You think I would leave you because you're sick?" His voice was barely controlled. "Jane, I would marry you in a hospital bed if that's what it took. I would marry you if you were bald from chemotherapy or in a wheelchair or attached to machines. I love you, not some perfect version of you." The sincerity in his voice broke down the last of Jane's defenses. "But the wedding! Your family flew here from California. We'll lose all the deposits. Everyone will think—" "I don't care what anyone thinks," Marcus said firmly. "I care that the woman I love is sitting here telling me she might die, and I've been blind to see it." At 6:30 a.m., Marcus made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First, he called 911. "I need an ambulance at the Omni Scottsdale Resort, Bridal Suite 1247. My fiancé is having a medical emergency." Second, he called his parents. "Mom, Dad, we need to cancel the wedding. Jane is sick and we're going to the hospital. Call the relatives and tell them we'll explain everything later." Third, he called Jane's parents. "Linda, it's Marcus. I need you and Robert to meet us at Phoenix Baptist Hospital. Jane collapsed and we're taking her to the emergency room right now." The paramedics who arrived at the Omni Scottsdale Resort were Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, and her partner, Mike Rodriguez. Sarah was a 15-year veteran who had seen everything from heart attacks to overdoses, but she'd never been called to help a bride on her wedding morning. Sarah took one look at Jane and immediately began rapid assessment protocols. Blood pressure dangerously low, heart rate erratic and weak, severe dehydration, signs of significant weight loss, altered mental status. "Ma'am, how long have you been feeling unwell?" Sarah asked while Mike prepared IV fluids and oxygen. "Months," Jane whispered, the honesty feeling like freedom. "And today was supposed to be your wedding day?" "Yes." Sarah and Mike exchanged glances that spoke volumes about what they'd seen in their years of emergency response. People who ignored serious symptoms because of social pressure, family expectations, or simple denial. "Well, today is going to be about saving your life instead," Sarah said matter-of-factly as they prepared to transport Jane to the ambulance. "The wedding can wait." As the ambulance pulled away from the Omni Scottsdale Resort, Jane looked back at the luxury hotel where she was supposed to have spent the morning becoming a bride. Instead, she was becoming something much more important, a woman who had finally chosen her life over everyone else's expectations. The morning sun was painting the McDowell Mountains in shades of pink and gold, and for the first time in months, Jane felt like she could breathe, not because her physical symptoms had improved, they hadn't, but because she had finally stopped running from the truth. Marcus rode beside her in the ambulance, holding her hand and whispering promises about the future they would build together once she was well. "We can have the wedding later, when you're healthy, when you can walk down that aisle knowing you're going to live to celebrate our 50th anniversary." Jane squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. All of you, sick or well, perfect or imperfect. That's what marriage vows mean, isn't it? In sickness and in health." As Phoenix Baptist Hospital came into view, Jane realized that this was her real breakthrough, not making it to the altar despite being sick, but choosing to get help despite everyone's expectations. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't pushing through the pain. Sometimes it's admitting you can't push through it anymore. And sometimes the most important promise you make isn't to your future spouse, it's to yourself, to choose life over perfection, truth over appearances, and health over everyone else's happiness. The wedding would have to wait, but for the first time in months, Jane was certain there would be a future to wait for.
Dr. Amanda Richardson had been working emergency medicine at Phoenix Baptist Hospital for 12 years, but she'd never had a patient arrive in a wedding dress, even if it was just silk pajamas and a hospital gown by the time Jane reached the trauma bay. Within 30 minutes of Jane's arrival, Dr. Richardson had run more tests than Jane had seen in her entire life: blood panels, EKGs, chest x-rays, CT scans, and an echocardiogram. The results painted a picture that was both terrifying and oddly relieving in its clarity. Jane, you have a condition called hyperthyroidism caused by Graves' disease, Dr. Richardson explained, pulling up a chair beside Jane's hospital bed where Marcus sat holding her hand. Your thyroid gland has been producing excessive hormones, which is why you've been experiencing rapid heartbeat, weight loss, tremors, fatigue, and all the other symptoms you've been having. Jane stared at the doctor, processing this information. Graves' disease? Am I going to die? Not if we treat it properly, Dr. Richardson said, with the calm confidence of someone who dealt with medical crises daily. But Jane, if you had pushed through that wedding ceremony today, there's a real possibility you could have gone into thyroid storm, a life-threatening complication that can cause heart failure, stroke, or death. The words hung in the air like a validation of every instinct Jane had been ignoring for months. Marcus squeezed her hand tighter, his face pale with the realization of how close they'd come to losing everything. The good news, Dr. Richardson continued, is that Graves' disease is very treatable. We'll start you on medications to block the excess hormone production, and with proper treatment, most patients live completely normal lives. How long will treatment take? Jane asked, though she was afraid of the answer. It varies, but typically we see significant improvement within a few weeks, and many patients achieve remission within 12 to 18 months. You'll need regular monitoring, but there's every reason to expect a full recovery. As Dr. Richardson left to write up treatment orders, Jane and Marcus sat in the quiet of the hospital room, processing everything that had happened in the past 4 hours. Outside the window, they could see other families going about their Saturday activities, parents pushing strollers, teenagers heading to summer jobs, couples planning their weekends. Our guests, Jane said suddenly, remembering the 200 people who probably had been getting ready for a 5 p.m. ceremony. What did you tell them? Mom and Dad handled it. They sent out a message saying you had a medical emergency and the wedding was postponed until further notice. Most people were worried about you, not upset about the wedding. Jane felt tears start again, but this time they were tears of relief mixed with gratitude. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry I put us through this. Marcus shifted in his chair to face her more directly. Jane, listen to me. You have nothing to apologize for. You were sick with a real medical condition that affects your brain function and decision-making. You weren't thinking clearly because you literally couldn't think clearly. Before Jane could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Riley appeared, still in scrubs from her hospital shift, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, Jane's favorite flower. I heard you were here. I was working down in pediatrics when I saw your name on the emergency board. Jane held out her arms and Riley rushed over for a tearful reunion that included multiple apologies from both women. I should have made you go to the doctor. I should have called your parents or Marcus or someone when you refused to get help. I wouldn't have listened. I was too stubborn and too scared to face the truth. Over the next few hours, Jane's hospital room filled with visitors.
Her parents arrived, looking shaken but relieved, followed by Marcus's family, including Popo, who simply nodded at Jane as if to say, "I told you so," in the kindest possible way. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from Solar Vision Consulting sent a massive arrangement of desert plants with a note that read, "Take all the time you need to get well. Your job will be waiting when you're ready." Even some of the wedding vendors stopped by. Carmen Rodriguez, the wedding coordinator from Desert Botanical Garden, brought a small potted saguaro cactus with a card that read, "For new beginnings and desert strength." "We can reschedule everything," Carmen assured Jane. "The venue, the catering, the flowers. It will all be there when you're ready." Jane spent 3 days in the hospital getting her medication levels adjusted and learning about her new reality. She would need to take anti-thyroid medication daily, have regular blood tests to monitor her hormone levels, and make significant lifestyle changes to support her recovery. "The most important thing," explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the endocrinologist who would be managing Jane's long-term care, "is listening to your body. Graves' disease patients often push themselves too hard because they're used to having excess energy from the hyperthyroidism. As we normalize your hormone levels, you'll need to learn new limits." On Tuesday, Jane was discharged with a comprehensive treatment plan and follow-up appointments already scheduled. Marcus had taken the entire week off work to help her adjust, and her parents had rearranged their summer schedules to provide additional support.
The first few weeks of treatment were an adjustment period, unlike anything Jane had ever experienced. As her hormone levels began to stabilize, she had to relearn what normal felt like. The constant anxiety and racing heart gradually subsided, replaced by a calm she hadn't felt in months. Her appetite returned, and she slowly began gaining back some of the weight she'd lost. Most surprisingly, Jane discovered that getting sick and calling off her wedding hadn't destroyed her life, it had saved it. 3 months later, on a crisp September morning, Jane sat in the Desert Botanical Garden with her camera, photographing the late-season blooms that most people missed because they visited in spring. Her hands were steady, her vision was clear, and she felt strong enough to hike the entire trail without stopping to rest. "Getting some good shots?" Marcus asked, appearing on the path with 2 bottles of water and the easy smile that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Amazing shots," Jane said, showing him the camera's display. "I forgot how much I love doing this." They walked together toward the spot where their reception was supposed to have been held 3 months earlier. Now it was just a peaceful garden space where desert plants thrived in the harsh Arizona climate, resilient, beautiful, and perfectly adapted to survive and flourish in challenging conditions. "I've been thinking about something," Jane said, as they sat on a bench overlooking the Sonoran desert landscape. "I want to start speaking to engaged couples about health awareness and not ignoring medical symptoms." Marcus nodded, not surprised by this direction. Jane had always been someone who turned her challenges into ways to help others. "I think a lot of people, especially women, ignore serious health issues because they don't want to disrupt major life events. If sharing my story helps even one person seek medical attention sooner, it would make everything we went through worthwhile." 6 months after her original wedding date, Jane and Marcus were married in a small, intimate ceremony at Papago Park, surrounded by 30 family members and closest friends. Jane wore a simple sundress that fit her healthy body perfectly, and Marcus wore khakis and a button-down shirt. Popo officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. "In sickness and in health," Popo said during the brief ceremony, looking directly at Jane and Marcus, "means choosing each other and choosing truth, even when it's difficult." Jane's vows were simple but powerful. "Marcus, you loved me at my sickest and most stubborn. You chose my life over our wedding, and my health over everyone's expectations. I promise to be honest with you, to take care of myself so I can take care of us, and to never again choose perfection over truth." Marcus's vows brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Jane, you taught me that real love isn't about having a perfect wedding day. It's about choosing each other every day, especially on the hardest days. I promise to always see you clearly, to support your health and dreams, and to remind you that you're worth more than any expectation anyone could have."
The reception was a backyard barbecue at Jane's parents' house with Riley as maid of honor and Popo giving a toast about the wisdom of knowing when to quit and when to keep fighting. 1 year later, Jane had achieved remission from Graves' disease and was working as a patient advocate at Phoenix Baptist Hospital, helping people navigate medical crises and insurance challenges. She also led monthly support groups for people with thyroid conditions, and her photography had evolved into a side business specializing in portraits of medical survivors. Marcus had started a nonprofit organization providing emergency financial assistance to couples who had to cancel weddings due to medical emergencies, something they'd wished existed during their own crisis. "You know what the strangest part is?" Jane said one evening as they sat on their apartment balcony watching the desert sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "What's that?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I'm grateful it happened. Obviously, I wish I hadn't gotten sick, but I'm grateful I got sick when I did rather than later when it might have been too late. I'm grateful I learned to choose my health over other people's expectations, and I'm grateful I learned that the people who really love me will choose my life over their disappointment every single time." Marcus reached over and took her hand, noting how steady and strong it felt now. "Plus, we got a much better wedding out of it in the end." Jane laughed, the sound carrying across the desert evening air like a celebration of everything they'd survived and overcome together. 2 years later, when Jane was invited to speak at medical conferences about patient advocacy and the importance of listening to your body, she would always end her presentations with the same message. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't pushing through the pain, it's admitting you can't push through it anymore. Sometimes the most important promise you make isn't to your future spouse, but to yourself. To choose truth over appearances, health over expectations, and life over perfection. And sometimes what feels like the worst thing that could happen to you turns out to be exactly what you needed to save your own life. The desert taught Jane that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the most beautiful. It was about being adaptable, honest about your limitations, and knowing when to seek the resources you need to thrive. And in the end, that lesson was worth more than any perfect wedding day could have ever been.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.